My son grabbed my car keys at my husband's funeral. I had been walking toward my blue Honda, my purse tight against my black dress, the November wind biting through my sleeves. All I wanted was to get home, away from the soft voices asking if I'd be okay now, as if grief came with a schedule. Michael stepped into my path, 47, dark suit, the same expression he'd worn all week, calm, decisive, already in charge. "Mom, give me your keys." I blinked. "What?" "Your car keys, hand them over." I dug through my purse, half thinking he wanted to check the trunk or move the car so the funeral director could clear the lot. My fingers found the familiar metal, and when I placed it in his palm, the keys jingled once, bright, ordinary, and then went quiet as he closed his fist. He didn't give them back. "You don't need a car anymore, Mom." Around us, people were pulling out of the lot, heading back to their lives. I stood there keyless, looking at my son like he was a stranger wearing my family's face. "It's for your safety," he said. "You're not in condition to drive. Dad would have wanted me to take care of you." As if one funeral had erased 73 years of independence. "Michael," I said, keeping my voice even, "I need those keys." He slid them into his pocket with a finality that scared me more than his words. "I'll drive you home. We'll handle everything else later." I didn't argue. People were watching, and I refused to make a scene beside the flowers that still smelled like my husband. So I sat in the passenger seat, where I had never chosen to sit, and watched my car stay behind. I didn't know my husband had left an envelope in the glove box. The glove box held something my son never imagined. It started when Dad got sick. 3 years earlier, when Thomas was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, Michael suddenly became very concerned about our well-being. Not the kind of concern that brought casseroles or quiet check-in calls. This was concern with conditions attached. "Mom, you can't keep handling Dad's medications. What if you mix something up?" I'd been managing medications for 50 years, Michael. That was different. This is serious heart medication. Let me organize everything for you. It's for your safety. So he organized. He took over Thomas's pill dispenser, the one I'd been filling just fine, then typed a schedule, printed it in bold, and taped it to our refrigerator like a posted rule. He insisted on driving Thomas to every cardiology appointment. "It's just easier this way, Mom. You don't need the stress." Stress. As if caring for the man I'd loved for 46 years was some hobby I couldn't handle. But Thomas was tired, and fighting over pill organizers felt petty when he was struggling to breathe. So I let Michael take over. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it would end when Thomas got better. Thomas never got better, and Michael never gave the control back. In those final months, his help expanded, one small takeover at a time. He began opening our mail before we could get to it, sorting what he decided was important. I'd walk into the kitchen and find envelopes already slit, statements stacked neatly, my name on the front like decoration. He changed the address on Thomas's Social Security deposits to his house for safekeeping. He convinced Thomas to add his name to our checking account. "Dad, you're going to need someone who can handle things if you're in the hospital. This is practical." Thomas, exhausted from fighting his own body, agreed to everything. He signed papers without reading them, trusting his son was looking out for us. I should have read those papers more carefully. After the funeral, Michael's concern for my well-being intensified. Within a week, he had decided I was too fragile to handle financial matters. The bank statements that used to arrive in my mailbox stopped appearing, and when I checked the postal preview email, those grainy images of what should arrive that day, I saw my name on envelopes that never made it into my hands. "Mom, I arranged for all your bills to come to my address," he said. That way I can make sure everything gets paid on time. I'd been paying bills for 53 years, Michael. I know, but you're grieving. People make mistakes when they're grieving. Dad would want me to make sure you're taken care of. Dad would want. That became his favorite phrase. Dad would want you to be safe. Dad would want you to be careful with money. Dad would want you to let me handle this. What Thomas would have wanted was for me to remain the capable, independent woman he married. But Thomas wasn't there to say it, so Michael spoke for him. The bills got reorganized. My access got restricted. When I tried to check my account balance online, I discovered the password had been changed. I updated your banking password to something more secure, Mom, he said, handing me a slip of paper covered in symbols and numbers like a coded threat. It's for your safety. This is ridiculous. I want my own password. Mom, your old password was Dad's birth date. Anyone could guess that. Anyone. As if I were worried about international hackers prowling suburban Ohio for a widow's checking account. But he'd already changed it. The damage was done. When I called the bank to change it back, I learned something worse. Michael's phone number was now the primary contact to my account. Any security change required a confirmation code sent to him. While I sat with my landline pressed to my ear, my own money waited behind my son's approval. It's just a security feature, he said later, smiling like a man explaining a seatbelt. Banks do this now. It protects seniors from scams. Scams. That's what he called anyone who might try to give me access to my own life. Within 3 months, I couldn't pay a bill, couldn't check a balance, couldn't change a password without going through Michael. He said he was protecting me. I was starting to understand what he was protecting me from. My independence. If you're listening to this and you still have your keys, your passwords, your appointments, hold on to them. Don't laugh this off as family helping. That's how it starts. The medical control came next. Michael decided I was too emotional to handle my own healthcare decisions. Mom, I think I should start coming to your doctor appointments with you. Why? You're dealing with a lot right now. Grief affects memory, affects judgment. I want to make sure you're getting the care you need. It's for your safety. I'd been managing my own health care for 73 years. I'd raised 3 children, helped my husband through surgeries and heart trouble, managed my diabetes and blood pressure without incident. But according to Michael, grief had made me incompetent. I don't need you at my doctor appointments. What if the doctor says something important and you don't remember it correctly? What if there's a treatment decision and you're too upset to think clearly? Then I'll ask the doctor to write it down, I said, the way I always had. But Michael had already called Dr. Peterson's office. He'd explained that his mother was struggling with grief and might need help understanding medical information. He asked to be added to my HIPAA authorization. It's just so I can help you, he said, so I can ask questions if you forget. The next time I went to see Dr. Peterson, Michael was already there in the waiting room. He walked into the exam room with me, notebook in hand, pen moving while the doctor spoke. He talked as if I wasn't there. She's been forgetting her blood pressure medication sometimes, he said. I think we need a pill organizer system. I hadn't been forgetting anything, but the doctor looked at me with that soft concern reserved for elderly patients whose families were worried. Is that right? Dr. Peterson asked. Are you having trouble remembering your medications? With Michael beside me, taking notes, what could I say? That my son was lying? That he was trying to take my body the same way he'd taken my bank account? Sometimes, I heard myself say, it wasn't true, it was survival. Michael smiled, satisfied, polished, convincing. I'll drive you everywhere you need to go, Mom, he said. Appointments, errands, anything. That way I can make sure you're okay. The trap was closing around me, one helpful gesture at a time. And the terrible thing was, from the outside, it looked like love. After Thomas's funeral, the helpful gestures became commands. Michael didn't just take my car keys that day. In the weeks that followed, he methodically removed every other way I had of leaving my own house without asking his permission first. It started with my bus pass. "Mom, why would you ride the bus when I can drive you anywhere you need to go?" "Because sometimes I want to go places without asking." "It's not about permission," he said, like he was correcting a child. "It's about safety. Do you know what kind of people ride the bus these days?" I had been riding that same route for 15 years. I knew exactly who rode it: working people, older people going to appointments, teenagers heading to after-school jobs, normal people living normal lives, but according to Michael, they were all potential threats to my well-being. He took my bus pass the same way he took my keys. Not by force, by making it sound unreasonable for me to want it. A week later, my pharmacy texted that my refill was ready. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, waiting for my own body to remember it could still move through the world. Then I had to call my son and ask when he could fit me in. Next came my bicycle. I kept it in the garage for short trips, to the library, the corner store. Nothing fancy, a simple bike with a front basket, but it was mine. It meant I could decide on a Tuesday afternoon that I wanted fresh bread without having to explain myself. "Mom, you could fall off that thing and break a hip," Michael said. "At your age, that could be a death sentence." I'd been riding bicycles for 60 years. "That was before you had balance issues." "I don't have balance issues." "Grief affects balance, Mom. Grief affects everything. It's for your safety." Grief. Michael's explanation for every freedom he took away. Grief made me incapable of managing money. Grief made me unsafe behind the wheel. Now grief was apparently affecting my balance. He moved my bicycle to his house for storage. Just temporarily, he promised. Just until I felt more stable. My keys weren't the only thing missing. His next target was my independence at the bank. 3 weeks after the funeral, he announced we needed to visit First National together to update my account security. "Mom, I've been thinking about your banking situation. With all these scams targeting seniors, we should add security measures." "What kind of measures?" "Oh, basic things," he said. "Alerts, limits, extra verification. The bank can call me if there's any unusual activity." I should have said no. I should have told him my banking was fine, that I had been managing money since I was 18 and had never bounced a check or missed a payment. But I was tired of fighting every small battle, and it seemed easier to go along with this one. That was a mistake. The bank lobby smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and old paper. A printer whirred somewhere behind the counter. Keyboards clicked in short, impatient bursts. When we sat down at a desk, the young account manager, Jennifer, smiled with practiced warmth and asked me 3 verification questions in a tone that made my life sound like a form. Mother's maiden name, last deposit amount, the answer to a security prompt I didn't remember setting. Michael did most of the talking. "My mother's been having difficulties since my father passed," he said, as if I weren't sitting right there. "She's confused about her finances, and I'm concerned about her vulnerability to scams." Jennifer looked at me with professional sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Patterson. What kind of difficulties have you been having?" I wanted to tell her I hadn't been having any difficulties at all, that my son was lying, that grief didn't erase a lifetime of competence. But Michael's hand settled on my shoulder. Gentle pressure, a private reminder to let him handle it. "Oh, you know," I heard myself say. "Sometimes I forget whether I paid a bill." None of it was true, but it was easier than making a scene in a bank lobby where everyone would only see a son helping his widowed mother. I understand completely, Jennifer said. We see this often after a spouse passes. We have protections we can add. Michael leaned forward, suddenly very interested. Like what? Jennifer slid a brochure across the desk and started explaining options, transaction alerts, daily withdrawal limits, a trusted contact for suspected fraud, statement copies sent to a second address, additional verification above a certain amount. That sounds perfect, Michael said before I could answer. Let's set it up. The printer hummed again. Papers slid out. Jennifer angled them toward me and tapped where my signature belonged, her voice careful, as if she was trying not to look directly at what was happening. Within an hour, I could still buy groceries. I could still write small checks. But anything meaningful, anything that required a change, a reset, a question, now ran through my son's phone and my son's presence. When I tried to ask about reversing it, Jennifer's eyes flicked to Michael, then back to me. Well, Mrs. Patterson, she said, lowering her voice, to remove these settings, we'd need the authorized signer present, or we'd need verification sent to the primary contact number on file. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, frozen for a beat. Then she finished softly, "For your protection." The manager looked uncomfortable. My protection. Everything Michael did was for my protection. When we left the bank, Michael was practically glowing. "See, Mom? Now you don't have to worry about any of this. I can handle it for you." I never wanted you to handle everything for me. I know it feels strange, he said, and his tone turned soothing again. You'll appreciate it later, when you're not stressed about bills and statements and paperwork. As if managing my own life was a burden instead of basic human dignity. 2 weeks later, he brought up the subject I'd been dreading. "Mom, I've been talking to some people about your situation." "What people?" "Friends who've been through this with their parents," he said. "They think we should consider having you evaluated." My blood went cold. Evaluated for what? "Just a cognitive assessment," he said quickly. "Nothing scary, just to make sure you're functioning at full capacity. I already found a clinic. They had an opening next Thursday." There it was, the threat I had seen coming from the moment he took my keys. Michael wanted me declared incompetent. There's nothing wrong with my mind. "I know you think that," he said gently, the way he always did when he was about to tighten the rope. "But grief affects judgment. Sometimes people aren't the best judges of their own state." Grief again, the excuse for everything. "What happens if I don't go?" I asked. Michael hesitated, just a fraction of a second, long enough for me to understand exactly what he was aiming for. "Then we look at other options," he said. "More support, maybe a guardian to help with important decisions." A guardian, legal control over every part of my life. "I don't need a guardian. I hope not," he said, still calm. "But if you refuse, Mom, how do you think that looks? If you're fine, you'll take the test. If you won't, people start asking why." The trap was perfect. Agree, and risk being labeled incompetent. Refuse, and he'd call my refusal proof. "It's just a precaution, Mom," he said, "just to protect you." But we both knew who he was really trying to protect. And it wasn't me. 2 days after Michael's guardianship threat, I made a decision. I needed to get something from my car. Michael had driven me everywhere for the past month, but he'd left my Honda sitting in my garage. I suppose he thought it was harmless, useless metal, now that I didn't have keys. He was wrong. I waited until Tuesday morning, until his office day, when he wouldn't stop by at 8:30 to check on me. The house felt too quiet in that particular way, like it was holding its breath. In the garage, the air smelled faintly of cold concrete and old motor oil. I stood beside the Civic Thomas I had chosen together and rested my palm on a hood, letting myself remember what it felt like to decide where I wanted to go. Then I opened the passenger door. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to sit in my own car, to feel, just for a minute, like my life still belonged to me. My eyes went straight to the glove compartment. Thomas always kept our registration and insurance papers there. A small flashlight, a pack of tissues. A neat stack, familiar, predictable. But when I pulled the latch, it opened with a small, crisp click. And the papers inside didn't look right. The stack was gone. Instead, a single thick envelope lay on top, heavy enough that it didn't slide, the edges stiff like official documents. And beneath it, I noticed something else. One corner of the registration sleeve was empty, like a sheet had been removed and never put back. My throat tightened. The envelope was cream-colored, and my name was written across the front in Thomas's careful handwriting. The envelope was addressed to me. I lifted it out with shaking hands. It was heavier than it should have been, the paper expensive and formal. Under my name, Thomas had written, "To be opened only if Michael tries to take control of your life. Call within 48 hours." My heart stopped. Thomas had known, or at least, he had worried enough to prepare for it. I tore it open right there, in the passenger seat, my breath fogging the glass. Inside were several documents folded neatly together. On top was a handwritten letter in his familiar pen. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "If you're reading this," he wrote, "then Michael has done exactly what I feared. He said he hoped he was wrong, that he hoped I would never have to open the envelope. But if I did, he wanted me to know he had planned for this possibility." It felt like Thomas was speaking from somewhere I couldn't reach, and somehow still steadying my hands. He wrote that he'd noticed Michael's help growing sharper, the way he tried to manage the medications, redirect mail, speak for me. Thomas didn't write it like an accusation. He wrote it like a man making a record. Then he wrote the line that made my eyes burn. "Margaret, you are the strongest, most capable person I have ever known. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." I cried quietly, the way I'd learned to cry since the funeral, so the sound wouldn't carry through walls. He explained what was inside, a copy of our will, clear and simple, naming me as the beneficiary of our assets, and documentation for a life insurance policy Michael didn't know existed. I unfolded the pages with careful fingers. There it was in plain print. Beneficiary, me. Payout, $2 million. $2 million. For a long moment, the number didn't feel real. It was just ink. But then it hit me the way cold air hits your lungs. Sharp, undeniable. Thomas wrote that he'd opened the policy years earlier, when Michael's control started spreading. He'd paid the premiums through an account Michael never saw. Not because he didn't trust me, because he didn't trust what grief might do to the people around me. Tucked behind the documents was a business card for his attorney, someone Thomas had known for decades. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, were 3 short sentences. "He knows everything. He's expecting your call. Do it within 48 hours. Finally, Thomas wrote this. "Protecting myself was not cruel. It was necessary. And I didn't have to fight alone." I sat in that car with the envelope in my lap and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the soft, wishful kind, the hard kind, made of paper, ink, and instructions. But hope didn't mean I could be careless. Michael couldn't know what I'd found. If he learned about the policy, he would try to get his hands on it. If he learned about the attorney, he would try to get in front of me, like he did at the bank, like he did at the doctor. So I folded everything back into the envelope, slid it into my purse, and closed the glove compartment until it latched with another small click, like a secret locking itself back into place. Then I went inside and picked up the phone. The receptionist answered on the second ring. "Morrison and Associates, how may I help you?" "I'd like to speak with Mr. Morrison, please," I said. "My name is Margaret Patterson." There was a brief pause. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson," she said, and her voice changed just slightly. "Yes, he's been expecting your call. Can you hold?" Expecting my call? Of course he was. When the attorney came on the line, his voice was warm and steady. "Margaret, I'm so sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good friend." "I assume you found the envelope?" he asked gently. "Yes." "Good," he said. "Thomas prepared us well. When can you come in? Privately?" "As soon as possible. How about tomorrow at 10? And Margaret, don't discuss this with anyone until after we meet. Not even family. Thomas was very specific." "I understand." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and realized something that made my hands go still. The retainer was already paid. Thomas hadn't just left me a name. He'd already hired him, briefed him, prepared him. My husband had planned for this possibility, down to the smallest detail. The next morning, I had to be clever about getting to Mr. Morrison's office. Michael arrived at 8:30 sharp, the way he always did. "Good morning, Mom. How are we feeling today?" We, as if my emotional state was something he managed on a clipboard. "I'm fine, Michael. I was thinking we could go to the grocery store this morning. Actually, I was hoping to spend time at the library." "The library?" He said it like I'd suggested skydiving. "I want to research some health information." "Mom, if you have health questions, you should ask Dr. Peterson. Or I can look things up for you." "I prefer books." More controllable, I thought. If I used his computer, he could watch what I searched. If I used his phone, he could decide what I was allowed to know. "I'll just feel better doing it myself." Michael hesitated, trying to find a reason to say no that wouldn't sound unreasonable. "I suppose I could drive you there after we finish at the grocery store." "I can take the bus." "Mom, you don't have a bus pass anymore, and you know how I feel about public transportation." The trap started to tighten again. Michael wasn't going to let me disappear for hours without knowing where I was. But I had one advantage now. I had someone expecting me. "You know what?" I said, making my voice soft. "You're probably right. Maybe I'll just stay home today." Michael's face relaxed immediately, as if he'd successfully prevented a disaster. "I think that's a good idea, Mom." After he left, I waited exactly 15 minutes, long enough that he wouldn't double back out of suspicion, short enough that I could still pretend that I'd stayed where he wanted me. Then I called a cab. At 9:45, I was sitting in the waiting room of Morrison, Blackwell & Associates. The office smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Thick carpet swallowed footsteps. Somewhere deeper inside, I heard a wall clock ticking, steady, indifferent, like time itself was keeping records. Mr. Morrison came out to greet me, tall, silver-haired, 70s. The kind of handshake that said he'd spent a lifetime holding ground. "Margaret, I'm glad you could come in." "Thank you for seeing me." "Thomas spoke about you often," he said gently. "He was very proud of you." We walked past shelves of law books into his office. On his desk was a thick folder with my name on it, tabbed like a case that had been waiting to wake up. "Thomas prepared extensively for this meeting," he said. "He wanted you to have tools, not just comfort. How much did he tell you about Michael?" "Enough," Mr. Morrison said carefully, "and your envelope fills in the rest." That alone, someone treating it as a file, not a family argument, made my chest loosen. He opened my folder and pulled out a notepad. "The first thing you need to understand," he said, looking at me over his glasses, "is that your son has no legal standing to make decisions about your life. Not without a court order, not without valid power of attorney. But the bank made changes based on what your son told them and what their senior protection program allows," he said. "That doesn't make it permanent. It makes it reversible. I could feel myself trying to breathe without asking permission. Mr. Morrison tapped his pen once, like a starting gun. Here's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it fast. If Michael files a guardianship petition first, we spend weeks playing defense. If we move first, we force him to justify himself. How fast? I asked. Today, he said. There are filing deadlines and procedural timelines. He threatened you with an evaluation. That means he's thinking about papers. He slid a single sheet toward me. Letter of representation, my name, his letterhead. A clean statement that he represented me and that all matters involving my finances and capacity should be directed through his office. This, he said, goes to the bank and, if necessary, goes to the court. We'll also send notice to your son by certified mail. Not to punish him yet, to create a timeline. Timeline, proof, source, procedure. Thomas had built a road. Mr. Morrison was putting guardrails on it. Can Michael still try for guardianship? I asked. He can try, Mr. Morrison said, but he would have to prove you're unable to care for yourself. That's difficult when you're represented by counsel and when we have documentation. From my doctor? Yes, he said. We'll request a statement of competency and, if needed, schedule an independent evaluation on your terms, not his. That matters. He leaned forward. And Margaret, what your son is doing isn't just morally wrong. Financial exploitation of an older adult is a crime in this state. Should I press charges? My voice came out thin. Keep the option open, he said. But first we give Michael a chance to step back without turning this into a war. We'll put boundaries in writing. If he crosses them after notice, that's when consequences become clearer. He handed me his card, then wrote a second number on the back. My direct line. If Michael becomes aggressive when he realizes you have counsel, don't argue, don't negotiate. Call me. He picked up his desk phone. Now, he said, let's call your bank. I sat while he spoke with First National. His tone turned crisp, professional, controlled. This is Attorney Morrison. I represent Margaret Patterson. I'm calling to provide notice that Mrs. Patterson is revoking any third-party controls or trusted contact settings that wrote verification to her son. I can email and fax my letter of representation immediately. A pause. The faint sound of a keyboard clacking through the receiver. Yes, I'll hold. While we waited, Mr. Morrison explained in a low voice, like he was teaching me how to keep my footing. Banks sometimes put protective holds on changing contacts when a family member has positioned themselves as the gatekeeper, he said. They call it fraud prevention. It can feel like a cage. My letter gives them cover to unlock it. The line clicked again. Yes, he said. I understand your verification policy. She can come in with ID today, or we can use notarized instructions. For now, remove the son as primary verification contact and reset online access credentials to Margaret directly. Another pause. Yes, she is competent and represented. He listened, then nodded to himself. Good. Put a temporary restriction on third-party changes unless made in person by Mrs. Patterson, and document this call in the account notes. He hung up and finally allowed himself a small smile. They've removed him as the gatekeeper, he said. You'll regain full access, and that hold, your freeze, will lift as soon as they process the representation note. That can be immediate once your ID is verified. The freeze would lift immediately, not because the world suddenly became kind, but because procedure finally recognized me as the person in charge. And the notice to Michael? I asked. Mr. Morrison tapped the certified mail form. Goes out today. He'll likely receive it tomorrow. That's your 24-hour window to stay quiet and gather what you need. 24 hours, a small number, a large difference. When I left his office an hour later, I felt like a different person. Not suddenly fearless, just no longer unarmed. But I also had one more thing to do. I needed evidence of Michael's controlling behavior, something that would exist outside my memory. Something that didn't depend on anyone believing an older woman over her concerned son. That evening, when Michael came by for his check-in, I was ready. I positioned my phone on the kitchen counter, recording already running, half hidden behind a stack of mail. My hands were steady in a way they hadn't been in weeks, and I knew exactly how to guide him into saying what I needed. "Michael," I said, "I've been thinking about the competency evaluation." His face lit up. "You have?" "Yes," I said, keeping my voice calm, "and I've decided I don't want to do it." The change in his expression was immediate. The concerned sun flickered out. Someone colder stepped forward. "Mom, that's not really your decision to make anymore." "What do you mean?" "You're not thinking clearly," he said, as if he were reading from a script. "You haven't been for months. The confusion, the forgetfulness, the poor judgment. Someone needs to make responsible decisions for you." "I'm not confused, Michael." "You think you're not confused, but that's exactly what confused people think." He leaned in slightly. Dad understood this. That's why he made me promise to take care of you. There it was again. Dad would want. "When did Dad make you promise that?" I asked. "Before he died. He was worried about you, Mom. Worried about your ability to handle things on your own." A lie, clean, confident, said like truth because he expected it to become truth if he repeated it enough. "So you think you have the right to make my decisions for me?" "I think I have the responsibility to make sure you're safe and secure," he said, "even if you don't understand what's best for you." The arrogance in his voice took my breath for a moment. "What if I refuse to cooperate with your plans?" I asked. "Then I'll take legal action to protect you from yourself," he said, and he didn't even lower his voice. Guardianship exists for situations exactly like this. When elderly people lose the ability to make rational decisions. "You'd really take me to court?" "If that's what it takes to keep you safe, yes." He said it like he was proud. "The court will see I've been managing your finances, overseeing your medical care, making sure you don't put yourself in dangerous situations. They'll understand you need supervision." Supervision, like I was a child. "And if the court grants you guardianship," I said, "what then?" "Then I'll make sure you're properly cared for," he said. "Maybe in a nice assisted living facility, professionals, monitoring. You won't have to worry about anything." There it was. Not just control of money, control of where I lived. "I see," I said softly. "I know it sounds scary now," he went on, soothing again, "but you'll be happier when you don't have to deal with responsibilities. You can just enjoy your golden years." Enjoy them inside a cage he called care. After Michael left, I sat alone in my kitchen and replayed the recording. His voice, clear and unmistakable, laying out his plan to take control of my life, whether I wanted it or not. He didn't know I was listening, but tomorrow Mr. Morrison would hear every word. 2 days later, I invited Michael to my house for a conversation. He arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, the way he always did when he thought he was stepping in to manage something. I heard the familiar pattern, the hard knock, the brief pause, the doorknob turning like he already belonged on the other side of it. What he wasn't prepared for was Mr. Morrison sitting at my kitchen table. Michael stopped in the doorway so abruptly his shoes squeaked against my entry rug. "Mom, who's this?" I kept my voice even. "Michael, I'd like you to meet James Morrison. He's my attorney." The color drained from his face in a slow, ugly wave. He stared at the silver-haired man in the expensive suit, the way people stare at a court summons. "Your attorney?" "Please," Mr. Morrison said, polite but immovable. "Sit down. We have a few things to discuss." Michael sat, but only halfway, like he might bolt. The chair legs scraped the tile. The kitchen felt quieter than usual, as if the refrigerator had stopped humming to listen. Mr. Morrison opened a leather portfolio and laid out papers with a careful, deliberate order. A copy of his letter of representation, a printed timeline in bullet points, a receipt-sized strip from the post office, certified mail, and a green card stub that meant notice was already on its way. "Mr. Patterson," Mr. Morrison began, "I represent your mother in legal matters, specifically the unauthorized control you've assumed over her financial and personal affairs." "Unauthorized?" Michael's voice jumped. "I've been helping my mother. She's been confused since Dad died." "Mr. Patterson," Mr. Morrison interrupted, not raising his voice. "Your mother has not been declared incompetent by any court. She has not granted you power of attorney. The banking restrictions and trusted contact controls you initiated were accomplished through misrepresentation." Michael's eyes darted between the papers, the attorney, and me, trying to find the seam where his control had been stitched and how it had been cut. "I don't understand what this is about." "I believe you understand perfectly," Mr. Morrison said. He placed my phone, screen down, on the table, like it was just another document. "Your mother and I listened to a conversation you had with her 2 nights ago," he said. "The one where you described your plans for guardianship proceedings and discussed placing her in assisted living if she didn't comply." Michael went pale. His gaze locked on the phone as if it might detonate. "That was private." "It was coercive," Mr. Morrison said. "Threatening legal action against a competent adult because she refuses your control is not concern. It's pressure." I spoke for the first time since the papers came out. "I believe you have my car keys." Michael's hand went to his pocket without thinking. A reflex, a confession. "Mom, we've talked about this. You shouldn't be driving." "According to whom?" Mr. Morrison asked. "Has her doctor ordered her to stop? Has the licensing authority restricted her? Has anyone evaluated her driving ability professionally?" "Well, no, but—" "Then you have no legal basis to prevent her from operating her own vehicle," Mr. Morrison said. "You are not her guardian. You are not her physician. You are not the state. You are her son." Michael pulled my keys out, but he didn't hand them over. He held them tight, metal biting into his palm. I heard the small, familiar jingle, the same sound from the funeral, only now it sounded like it belonged to me again. "She could hurt someone," he said. "She could hurt herself." Mr. Morrison didn't flinch. "Your mother has driven for decades with a clean record. Your fear is not authority." I held out my hand, steady. "The keys, Michael." He hesitated long enough for me to see the calculation behind his eyes. How much he could resist without looking like the villain in his own story. Then he placed them in my palm. The keys felt heavier than I remembered, warmer, like they'd been waiting to come home. For a second, nobody spoke. The room held a hush, so sharp it felt physical. Mr. Morrison reached back into his portfolio and slid a thick envelope onto the table. "Now," he said, "there's something else we need to address. Your father left your mother a letter with instructions, and those instructions affect your relationship with her going forward." Michael swallowed. "What instructions?" I opened the envelope slowly. The paper made a soft crackle as it unfolded. Thicker than ordinary printer pages. A notarized copy with a stamp that caught the light like a warning. "Your father knew this day could come," I said. "He knew you might try to take control after he died, so he prepared." I read from Thomas's words, not all of them, just the part he wrote like a boundary line. "Michael has always been controlling. I was afraid that when I died, he would see Margaret as someone who needed managing too. This letter is to inform Michael that his mother is financially independent and legally protected. Michael stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Financially independent? He scoffed, but his voice wobbled. Mom, you're living on Social Security. You need my help? Mr. Morrison's smile was small and sharp, the kind you only say right before a card flips. Actually, Mr. Patterson, he said, your mother is considerably more secure than you realize. He slid a bank statement across the table. Not from the account Michael had been hovering over. A separate account, my name alone at the top. Your father opened a life insurance policy 3 years ago, Mr. Morrison said. Your mother is the sole beneficiary. The payout was $2 million. Michael's jaw dropped. $2 million? The insurance check was mine, I said quietly, and it was already deposited into an account only I can access. The silence that followed was the loudest sound in my kitchen. For years, Michael had been positioning himself like a man guarding a door, certain there was only one room behind it. He had never imagined there was another door, another key, another set of resources he couldn't touch. But you said you needed help, he stammered. You said you were confused. I never said either of those things, I told him. You said them. You told the bank I was confused. You told my doctor I was forgetting medications. You told anyone who would listen that I couldn't manage my own life. Mr. Morrison opened another folder. Based on evidence your mother gathered and the admissions on that recording, we could pursue elder financial exploitation, fraud, and coercion, he said. Your mother prefers to resolve this privately, provided you agree to specific conditions. Michael's eyes narrowed. What conditions? I slid the agreement toward him. The paper didn't look dramatic. That was the point. It looked final. First, I said, you will have no involvement in my finances. No access, no passwords, no helpful calls to my bank, no statements sent to your address. Mom, second, I continued, you will not interfere with my medical care. I choose my doctors. I manage my medications. I decide who sits in the exam room. But what if, third, I said, you will not restrict my transportation, my housing, or my social life. I will go where I choose. I will see whom I choose. I will live where I choose. Michael shook his head hard, like he could shake the words off the page. This is crazy. You're 73. You need guidance. You need protection. From whom? I asked. From strangers on the bus, or from family who wants to control my life? I looked directly at him. You were the threat I needed protection from, Michael, and Thomas knew it. Mr. Morrison placed a pen beside the signature line. Mr. Patterson, he said, your mother is offering you a choice. Accept these boundaries and maintain a relationship with her on respectful terms. Or we proceed formally, where you will lose standing quickly and your actions will be examined in a way you will not enjoy. Michael stared at the agreement. His breathing sounded too loud in the quiet kitchen. And if I agree, he whispered. Then you're welcome to visit by appointment, I said. Dinner, holidays, family events, but as equals, not as a handler and a patient. He picked up the pen with trembling fingers. This isn't how families are supposed to work. You're right, I said. Families are supposed to run on love and respect, not control. Michael signed. When he left my house that morning, he looked smaller. The confident man who had been managing my life was gone, replaced by someone who now had to ask permission to see his own mother. I felt sorry for him, but I didn't regret it. For the first time in months, I held my keys, and they felt like my name. The changes in Michael's life became apparent within 2 weeks. In a community like ours, news traveled fast, especially when it involved someone as visible as Michael had been, striding around town like the unofficial manager of his confused mother's affairs. The first sign was his house. Michael had been living in a large colonial on Maple Street. The the kind of place that whispered financial stability. 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, lawn cut in perfect lines. The sort of home you bought when you believed your future was already paid for. But Michael's lifestyle had been built on expectations that no longer existed. For 3 years, he'd been counting on inheriting my house, my savings, and what he assumed would be a modest life insurance payout from Thomas. He'd been spending like a man whose safety net was guaranteed, making choices based on money he thought would eventually be his. The reality was different. My house was mine. My savings were intact and growing. And the little policy he'd been expecting, that was separate from the $2 million Thomas had kept out of his reach. Michael had been planning for an inheritance that was never going to come. Within a month, the hints turned into facts. Someone mentioned he'd traded his expensive car for something practical. Someone else said the lawn service stopped coming. And then, one morning on my walk, I saw it myself. A bright for sale sign staked into his front yard with a dull thunk of metal in the hard soil, as if the ground itself had made a decision. A few days later, Mrs. Delaney from 2 houses down leaned in at the mailbox and lowered her voice like she was sharing a scandal. "Poor Michael," she murmured. 30-day notice from the bank, can you imagine? 30 days. That number sat heavy in my chest, not because I enjoyed it, but because it confirmed what I'd already understood. When you build your life on someone else's future, reality eventually collects interest. Sandra taking a part-time job was the next thing I heard. Local library, a quiet job, the kind people took when they needed stability more than pride. And then I saw her. 6 weeks later, I was in the grocery store, near the produce section, choosing apples by feel the way Thomas had taught me. The overhead lights hummed. A cartwheel squeaked somewhere behind me. "Mrs. Patterson?" I turned and saw Sandra with a cart full of generic brands, coupons fanned in her hand like a shield. She looked tired, stress lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Sandra." "I wanted to thank you." That wasn't what I expected. "Thank me?" "For the way you handled things with Michael, with the legal agreement." She stepped closer, voice dropping. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know what he was doing to you. The bank accounts, the medical appointments, the car keys. He told me you needed help, that you weren't thinking clearly." "I see." "When your attorney explained everything, when I heard the recording," she shook her head and the coupons rustled softly in her hand. "I was mortified. Michael had been lying to me for years, about you and about us." Her gaze flicked down to her cart, budget groceries, careful choices. "He planned our future around money that wasn't his," she said quietly. "The house we bought, the cars, the vacations. He kept telling me credit card debt didn't matter because everything would work out when you were gone." I felt an old ache move through me, not pity for Michael, but the grief of realizing how easily my life had been turned into someone else's plan. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way," I said. "I'm not," Sandra said, surprising me with the firmness in her voice. "I'm grateful. You could have had him arrested. Instead, you gave him a chance to stop." She paused, then added, almost like a verdict, "That was more grace than he deserved." I looked at her, this woman dealing with the consequences of her husband's attempt to control my life, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Respect. She wasn't blaming me. She wasn't calling me cruel. She was naming the truth and learning how to stand on her own. "How are you managing?" I asked. "We're figuring it out," she said. "Michael's different since that day. Not better, just different. He's had to face things he didn't want to face." "And you?" A small, tired smile touched her mouth. "I'm learning I can handle more than I thought. The job is actually nice. It feels good to have money I earned myself." Before she left, she did something small that landed like a big thing. "Thank you again, Mrs. Patterson." Not Margaret, not Mom. Not the familiar title she'd used when Michael was pretending he ran the family. Mrs. Patterson. Formality, yes, but also recognition. A line drawn in a right place. As I watched her walk away, I understood something clean and sobering. The boundaries I established weren't only about protecting myself, they were about forcing everyone around me to live honestly. A few days later, Michael called, not to announce he was coming, to ask. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded tighter than before. "Would it be possible for me to visit this weekend?" A small sentence, a different posture. "Of course," I said. "What time works for you? Would 2 o'clock be all right?" "That sounds fine." I set the phone down and looked at my keys on the kitchen counter. Some consequences were loud. Houses for sale, budgets cut, reputations cracked. And some were quiet. A son learning for the first time that my time was not something he could take. He couldn't afford the house alone. 6 months later, I drove myself to the grocery store. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. For the first time in over a year, I walked into my garage, slid my key into the lock, and heard the soft click that used to be ordinary until someone tried to take it from me. The engine turned over on the first try. The seatbelt snapped into place. Simple sounds, personal proof. The keys felt different now, heavier with possibility, lighter with freedom. I took the long way to the store, past the park where Thomas and I used to walk. I drove slowly, not because I was uncertain, but because I could. No one was timing me. No one was allowing me. At the grocery store, I let myself wander, cartwheels rattling, fluorescent lights humming. I bought exactly what I wanted. Ice cream because I felt like it. Expensive coffee because I could. Fresh flowers because they made the kitchen look alive again. I paid with my own card from my own account, using money no one else monitored, the receipt printed out in a warm strip, and I held it for a second like it was a quiet victory. My routine settled into something peaceful. I woke when I felt rested. I took my medications on my schedule. I planned my days around my interests, not around someone else's fear. I started volunteering at the community center. I joined a book club. I made friends who knew me as Margaret, not as a mother who needed managing. Michael called every Tuesday, not to announce he was coming, to ask. Sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said no. Sometimes I suggested lunch somewhere public and short. The choice was always mine. When he did visit, he knocked and waited, hands visible, voice careful. He didn't ask about my finances. He didn't offer advice I didn't request. He didn't speak for me. He treated me like an adult, and I treated him like a guest. It wasn't the warm, easy relationship I once imagined, but it was honest, respectful, real. I looked at my keys on the counter that night and understood something I wish I'd learned earlier. People can take a lot until you stop handing them the keys. 1 year after Thomas's funeral, the house felt like mine again, not just on paper, but in my bones. I kept the signed agreement in a folder by the phone, and I kept my spare keys where only I could reach them. Michael still called before he came. Sometimes he didn't come at all, and I learned that peace could be a complete sentence. Sandra stayed at the library. She waved when she saw me, and she always called me Mrs. Patterson, like a promise she intended to keep. I never needed to win anyone back. I only needed to stop disappearing inside my own life. On quiet mornings, I would sit at my kitchen table, sunlight on the wood, and listen to the small sounds of a home that wasn't being managed by anyone but me. Don't let them take your keys. If this story hit close to home, share your thoughts or your own story in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, please like, share, and subscribe.